Hello, everyone. Let's give it a few more seconds for more folks to join, and then we will get started. Thank you to those who joined early. I see Chris. I saw Robbie. All right, let's get started. So, good morning or good evening, wherever you're joining in from today. Thank you for attending our webinar and spending the next hour with us. I am your host, Crystal, and I'm super excited to kick us off. Although we have a slide on housekeeping before I give it off to our speaker. So, first, the session is recorded, and you will receive the recording within 24 hours post-event via email. If you don't see that email, please feel free to reach out to events@criticalstart.com, and I'll be happy to assist you. Next, we will be launching polls throughout the session, so please remember to only click your answer once, as clicking twice will reset your response. And now this is my favorite part. We want this to be an interactive experience. So please use the chat to engage with us. We love to hear your questions and comments. I know Tim, our speaker, will be monitoring the chat a little bit too to see what you have for him. Okay, so please do engage with us in the chat. And then finally, note that you're on mute, but if you do like to come off mute, just raise your hand and I'll be able to bring you on stage. And then definitely, very special for today, we are giving away 4 Amazon gift cards to 4 lucky attendees. To enter the drawing, you can simply either answer the poll question or ask a question in the chat. All right, I'll stop talking now and hand over to our incredible speaker, Tim. The stage is all yours.
Thanks, Crystal. I appreciate that. Welcome, everyone, today. That's actually incredibly awesome for $25 Amazon gift cards. If you guys have the chance, please put in what would you purchase with a $25 Amazon gift card. I'm actually interested to see that. Maybe I'll take a look at those results as well. But what we're going to talk about today is phishing, right? And how to leverage kind of managed detection and response type phishing services to streamline maybe your current internal processes. So here's just an agenda overview of what we're going to be discussing today. We're going to talk a little bit about the evolution of phishing attacks, just to make sure you guys are clear historically on where they came from and a little bit more about them. And we're going to go over some real world case studies and some scary stats. I love talking about scary stats. And then give some tips from Tim, some phishing tips, and then also benefits of leveraging MDR for phishing analysis. And then talk a little bit about what we do on the threat notification and response side here within Critical Start. And then I will wrap it up with a conclusion and a Q&A session towards the end. So just real quick, a little bit about myself. My name is Tim Bandos. I am the field CISO here at Critical Start. I've been in the industry for about 20 years now. I started off my career working for DuPont, chemical manufacturing company / science company. I was their director of cybersecurity there. I was responsible for protecting around 100,000 endpoints. So a pretty large environment, to be honest with you. But you work for a company that's over 200 plus years old, trade secrets scattered everywhere, essentially throughout the network. It was an exciting job, right? We were, constantly having to roll out detections and protection, mechanisms and governance, risk and compliance programs, because we wanted to make sure that all those trade secrets that we were protecting were adequately safeguarded. And then after that, I pivoted into the security vendor space. I moved over to Digital Guardian, which is a data loss prevention company, where I was their CISO and VP of Managed Security Services. And then after that, I went into a company called Exidium, which was formerly known as Komodo. Maybe you remember that particular company. It was basically they invented SSLs for your browsers. And I was the CISO and EVP of SOC services there as well. All right, so let's kick this off. We'll talk a little bit about the evolution of phishing attacks. So in the 90s, maybe you remember this if you were around during that time frame, but this is really kind of the beginning, early phases of phishing type attacks. We had these AOL scams, right? These were the early phishing attacks targeting American online AOL users, and attackers would use fake login pages ultimately to steal credentials. So similar to what they do today. And then there was really an intro to email-based phishing as well around this time frame too. So email became widely adopted in the 90s, and then phishing kind of moved beyond just that AOL attacks. Attackers were impersonating businesses or service providers ultimately to trick users into providing login information. And then in the 2000s, we get into e-banking and e-commerce boom. There was a rapid growth of online banking and e-commerce, which ultimately led to a surge in phishing attacks as well. Attackers were essentially mimicking banks and payment platforms like PayPal to steal financial details. And they still do that today. PayPal is a heavily targeted or leveraged, type logo when attempting to acquire credentials. But luckily, PayPal and a lot of these other providers, have rolled out with multi-factor authentication, right, just to further protect, those credentials from ultimately being compromised. And then you also saw in the 2000s kind of this rise of mass email campaigns. Attackers began to leverage bulk emails and would send it out to a larger number of victims. And a lot of times, these phishing emails often contain malicious attachments or links, which once again is similar to what we're seeing today. And then we also had the first documented, not sure if it was the very first one, but the first documented spear phishing attack. That was in 2003, I believe. It was a more targeted form of phishing that had emerged around that time, where attackers were crafting personalized emails to a specific individual, often with some insider knowledge about the target that they were particularly going after. Then we move on to the 2010 timeframe. This is where spear phishing was a key tool for cyber espionage. Spear phishing became very popular with state-sponsored campaigns, cyber attacks, high-profile breaches like the 2014 Sony hack and 2016 U.S. elections were facilitated through spear phishing. This is also the introduction of whaling attacks as well. If anyone ever heard of that term, it was a kind of a subtype of spear phishing that were targeting more senior executives or higher profile individuals within an organization. And then we kind of move to this, crime as a service, this CASS, type service, where pre-packaged phishing kits and services were essentially for sale on the underground, on the dark market, the dark web, right? There was a dark web marketplace that would proliferate these types of tools that will allow essentially anyone to purchase, phishing capabilities. And then we kind of go into the 2015 timeframe. This is where spear phishing also took flight as well. And then in 2020s, we also had the COVID-19 pandemic driven surge as well, where they were leveraging COVID-19 stylized attack type activity, and they were also doing deep fake and AI enhanced phishing as well, which we're commonly seeing today. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well on what we're seeing within our SOC team, as we triage phishing emails that are coming inbound. All right, enough about the history. I'm tired of history. Let's go on to some scary stats. I love scary stats. Over the last 5 years, we've seen a significant increase, actually a 67% increase in cyber attacks during this time frame. And the question always is, why is that happening? As we continuously spend and invest on security technologies and further protecting our environments, right? You think about endpoint protection platforms and how far they've come over the last 10 to 15 years, you'd think cyber attacks would go down. But unfortunately, we have to deal with our cyber threat actors that are keeping pace with security technology and sometimes outpacing it, right? Looking for ways around our technology that we have deployed. And that's ultimately a potential reason, right, why we're seeing this increase. We're also seeing security breaches due to human error, 95%. That's a pretty large stat, but it makes sense. A lot of the breaches and investigations that I've been a part of, throughout my career, can essentially be tied back to an individual making a potential error, whether that's someone clicking on a link or an attachment, but or spinning up an RDP server, on the network and not putting the proper protections in place. It's human error, right? There's mistakes made by a human, which ultimately open up the doors for an attacker to get in. Then we're seeing 82% phishing attacks are responsible for a majority of the reported security incidents. I mean, it's very true. It seems pretty high, 82%. I wouldn't say that's the primary cause, right, of a lot of breaches, but it is very high on that end of the spectrum because it's very easy to do that. It's very easy to send out an email message with something laced inside of it in hopes of, one person clicking on it. If you send an email to 300 people, it's bound that someone in that particular group is going to click on that, particular link or attachment. And then this final stat I think is interesting. Effectiveness of security awareness and training, 70%. That's actually pretty good, right? At the end of the day, of course, there's that 30% gap in terms of it not being effective. But it can be difficult sometimes to detect or spot attacks, especially these days. But that is a significant number. So that really kind of speaks to the importance of having a security awareness and training program in place at whatever organization you work for, whether that's, leveraging a platform like a KnowBe4. They're actually right out of Clearwater, which is about 15 minutes from where I live. Fantastic platform, that delivers, continuous training throughout the year, tests you, on white hat phishing, basically where it sends you fake links and, sees what individuals are clicking on links, and then you can, provide additional training around that. I think it's good to kind of have that constant cycle and feedback loop of, continuously training and making sure everyone's aware. I know October last month was, cybersecurity awareness month, but really it should be cybersecurity awareness year. It should be throughout the whole year, every single day. We should be aware of, what we're doing, because ultimately, if click on that link or attachment that allows an attacker in, it's going to cause significant damage to the company potentially. So I'm going to get it real basic. I know you're going to be like, Tim, why are you showing us this? I just want to make sure everyone understands, the steps for a phishing attack to take place. But let's say a phishing email gets sent, victim receives said email, victim then clicks on that link, and that redirects to a fake website. And once the individual enters their credentials, like their username and password, that particular site is controlled by the adversary. That particular, website is controlled by the attacker, right? They can take that information and then leverage it on the real website. So this is a phishing attack that's more geared toward, acquiring your credentials, right? Sealing your information so that they can log in as you, right? And then, take action on objectives of whatever, they're looking to do. So that's a phishing attack leveraging credentials. Then there's also phishing attacks based on infection. So phishing email gets sent, victim receives the email, and let's say that victim clicks on a link or an attachment, and ultimately it spawns or runs, something malicious directly on the endpoint or exploits a vulnerability on the device. And that's where the computer now becomes infected with a backdoor that beacons out to the command and control infrastructure. So an attacker now essentially has backdoor access into your machine. And if your machine is directly plugged into the corporate environment, they now have access to other corporate devices, corporate servers. They can move laterally throughout the environment. So this is why it's critically important to be aware, right, of potential phishing, emails that come inbound, because security technologies aren't always going to filter those things out, right? There's ways of obfuscating that, and they're getting better too at trying to mask or obfuscate, once again, what their hidden agenda or motive is for that email. So just be very careful and be aware. All right, I like to do a couple poll questions throughout these things. My first poll question is: have you or someone fallen victim for a phishing attack? Right? Do you know anyone who's ever been involved in a phishing attack and accidentally clicked on that link or attachment, or maybe you yourself? It could be either or. I would love to see kind of the answers that come inbound there. Crystal, how do I see those answers? Is there a specific way of me doing that? I know you said you solved that particular problem on the last one. Is that in the poll section? All right, let's see. I'm here now. Has anyone clicked on it? Let's see. Let's take a look at the.
I did solve that, but it's not letting me click the share button. But I will tell you, reporting live, Tim, you got 11 votes.
Make sure.
Yes.
All right. Votes are coming in. I can always circle back to that, but let's go on to the next slide just to make sure. All right. So I do want to walk through a couple of case studies as well. So this has to do with, where we've seen basically phishing cases as the open incident, right? We saw in, I think, what was this? I think this was actually this year. It was a couple months ago. Ubiquity Networks, $46 million. Cyber thieves actually recently stole $46.7 million using an increasingly common scam where crooks spoofed communications from executives at the victim firm in a bid to essentially initiate unauthorized wire transfers. So that was a bit of a problem. But Ubiquity Networks, you kind of add up all that money, $46 million. That's a significant amount of money for this particular, company. Case study number 2, RSA. I don't know if you guys remember the RSA attack. This is where a phishing email was sent into RSA employees that contained a malicious attachment. When the RSA employee opened the attachment, it launched a sophisticated malware program called Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy is essentially a backdoor that allows command and control functionality back outbound. And you'd think too, with a company like RSA, it's a cybersecurity company. You'd think they have employees that are incredibly aware of, what phishing attacks look like. But ultimately, in this particular scenario, unfortunately, an employee, maybe they didn't work in the cybersecurity function. Maybe they worked in finance. I'm not picking on people who work in the finance department, but maybe they're just not as aware, right? This ultimately led to an infection, within that particular environment, which sad, right? I mean, that costs the company a significant amount of money. Next case, this is the case study number 3. This is Google and Facebook, $100 million, which I know seems significant to myself and maybe to most of you guys, but maybe not so significant to them. But Google and Facebook suffered a phishing email attack where they had a BEC, a business email compromise type of scheme where fake invoices were being sent that falsely billed both the companies for millions. So there was a ton of billings that were going out essentially, which ultimately equated to millions of dollars for for those particular companies. So once again, these are all results of phishing campaigns, phishing emails. This is why we all have to be aware. Back to my polling question, I finally see answers coming inbound. 100% of those questions, or 100% basically said yes, which is incredible. So yes, I think we all know either an individual or maybe we have fallen victim to clicking on a link or an attachment, but this is what happens, unfortunately, on a day-to-day basis. I actually am pretty good friends with an individual where his parents clicked on a link or an attachment, which ultimately led to the machine becoming infected, and it told them to dial up this number. They called the number, and they ultimately, at the end of the day, stole their entire 401k, which is incredibly upsetting and sad for them. But they lost everything. By talking to an individual, this individual convinced them to wire transfer money. I know you could say, well, why would they do such a thing? Kind of looking through that whole entire attack that carried out. But these are individuals, in their retirement age. They're just, not thinking about it. They were upset, that their machine was infected. They wanted to get this thing cleaned up, but they lost everything. So, this happens to a lot of individuals and a lot of families too, unfortunately. All right. Let's proceed forward. I like to talk about this particular breach. This is a breach that I was a part of that was associated with, a particular phishing campaign. I call this the HR breach, right? So in this particular case, this was an HR laptop. The individual that was applying for the job had submitted a link to download their malicious resume. The malware then installed when the HR personnel opened up that particular document, and boom, they started moving laterally within the environment. A malicious service was installed, which dropped remote admin utility. They started, executing WMI commands. They transferred an AWS client tool. We don't think about that, from an HR perspective, but they're a pretty good target. They're always opening up PDFs. They're always opening up Microsoft Word documents. Why not attempt to, target an HR employee? So this is something where it happened to an individual that opened up that document, and that's ultimately what occurred. So I dug a little bit deeper into this particular case, and I was able to actually link this back to a fake LinkedIn profile, that was provided. A fake web page was actually also created by this individual. He said his name was Martin, and he's an engineer from Switzerland. If you click that download resume button, that ultimately is what downloaded that Word document, and then contained inside that Word document was all this entrenched macro code, which infected the computer. You could go back to the HR person and be like, why would you go to a website to download a resume? But maybe they don't think like that. It's really difficult to say because it looked like a legitimate setup, right? He talks about himself. Here's my resume. He even has a fake LinkedIn page, but you start to drill in a little bit closer. He's got one connection. I mean, come on, who has one connection these days? We're constantly being spammed with like 20, 30 connections a day. I feel like I get inbound to my inbox. So, on the surface, this is pretty clear to maybe myself and other cybersecurity individuals, but maybe not to someone who works in HR. I don't know, but unfortunately, this is the case for this particular company. They got completely infected. They had me come in from an incident response perspective and kind of reconstruct what happened within the environment. They didn't have MDR. They really essentially didn't have much of an endpoint protection platform, really enabled. But what I can do is kind of reconstruct and stitch together all the events that occurred and transpired within this particular incident. So I walked them through all this, and I said, look, if you have detections in all these different areas right across the MITRE ATT&CK framework, you would have identified this, almost immediately, right? I mean, from the malicious resume even opening to obfuscated PowerShell commands running, to account discovery commands being executed in the environment. A lot of these things are indicative of an attack. So that's why there's really, kind of that that drive to have either a SOC team, a security operation center team that's looking at all the alerts of events and alerts that are coming in, or having an MDR deployed. If you don't have an MDR, or managed detection response service, or an internal team monitoring every single event and alert that comes in, you could be at risk, right, of an infection or a breach. So that's why it's really important to triage these types of things. All right, I'm going to go with poll question number 2. What is the most common phishing tactic that you have encountered? And I believe we have a list of the questions or the potential answers there too. Suspicious links, impersonation of trusted, contacts or brands, fake attachments, or urgent or threatening language, which is pretty intense. But I would love to see what everyone says for that one. I'm going to circle back to that as we proceed through this webinar. Okay, here's a couple of examples of what they look like. So this is a phishing email credential theft as it relates to Microsoft, right? And this makes sense, right? Microsoft, credentials really enable you to have access to, corporate email, provide potential access to maybe even a corporate environment. A lot of times individuals, leverage the same username and password for, authenticating to additional services, right, throughout their environment. So acquiring credentials from Microsoft is very, very important to adversaries. That's why we commonly see these types of, emails that come out like, oh man, there's a security alert in Microsoft. Click on this link. But look, this is what happens. You do something like that, you're ultimately going to give your credentials up. This is what it looks like from malware being attached. This looks pretty obvious to me, but not everyone sees it that way. In this particular case, this is coming from paychecks.email. This is a verification documents.doc. As requested, I've attached the details for your consideration. Sounds very sus to me, but individuals will click on that thing and it is going to infect your computer. So this is what a common malware attached email will look like. If we look at the most abused brands, though, 20 million, right? 20 million email threats are using Microsoft as the brand that they're leveraging. And once again, that kind of makes sense to my earlier point around, why not target acquiring credentials for Microsoft services, Office 365, your corporate email, because once again, that gets you, some of the trade secrets, that gets you really information that can be sensitive to an environment versus maybe just sending an Amazon link, right? Although that's bad, right? Microsoft is really, they're targeting ultimately kind of that corporate end user. And then this is what it looks like from a phishing email perspective that has been AI generated. Now, I don't know about you, but anytime I see emails now that are like multiple paragraphs, I immediately think ChatGPT. Like I know for a fact this is not your words, Karen. Like you did not type all of these out. And I don't just use Karen. You could use any name. Maybe it's Jim as well. Jim most likely would do the same thing. But for me, now when I see these, I immediately think AI, ChatGPT. Let me just be extra careful just in case, right? Are there any links or attachments in that thing? But once again, kind of tie it back. They're starting to look highly professional, right? No longer are there misspelled words. No longer are there, kind of choppy, broken up sentences. Some of the things that we're used to seeing maybe in 2010. I remember evaluating those phishing emails. I'm always like, how could someone click on this thing? But now we're getting to a point where it sounds professional. It sounds amazing, right? Like, yeah, I'll click on that. But this is what it looks like today. And this is an example of an AI generated phishing email. Back to my poll question around what is the most common phishing tactic you've seen. Suspicious links wins by 80%. Most of you said suspicious links. That makes sense. One person said urgent or threatening language. Wow. Once again, I would love to know what that was, but that's pretty intense. So that's interesting to know. Suspicious link, that's the most common thing, because if you think about it, links a lot of times can bypass a lot of those, email filtering type capabilities. If it's unable to check a link, if you can obfuscate a link a little bit better, right? It's harder for those filtering platforms to determine if they are malicious or not. So that's a lot of times why. Right, so you'll see suspicious links versus something being attached. It's very easy. Once you see something attached, they'll scan that thing for malware. Maybe it's a password protected zip file that tries to, scoot its way under the protection mechanisms. I've seen that happen, and they'll even put in the email, in the body of the email, say, "Here's the password. Please use it," and then open up the document. That happens too, unfortunately. So these are just some examples, right, of the things that we see out in the wild. And then what are the results of a successful phishing attack? I think that's always important. I don't think everyone ultimately can tie it back to, okay, if I clicked on this link or attachment, what really happened to the company? Loss of data and intellectual property, that's one of the biggest things. I've seen multi-billion-dollar strategic business units being spun off because one individual clicked on a suspicious link that allowed a state-sponsored adversary to get into that environment and steal the trade secrets for that company. Multi-billion dollars. That's a lot of money for one mistake that was made by an individual. Ransomware infections, breach of customer client data, reputational damage, widespread network outage, you name it. These are the results ultimately of an individual clicking on that link or attachment that ultimately leads to that. 0-day exploit, that's towards the bottom, and that makes sense. A lot of times, I don't want to say a lot of times, I would say in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, you always hear, oh man, let's be concerned about 0 days. That's not really a thing. 0 days aren't going to be wasted on a ton of companies because they're incredibly expensive to manufacture, right, in the adversary underground, essentially. So they're going to reserve those for high value targets, the HVTs, right? And a lot of times you're not going to see those 0-day exploits occurring unless it's a high value target. And a lot of times at that point, it's too late, right? They leverage that exploit, they've gotten into the environment and they move laterally, and then we find out kind of post after the fact. But it's important to understand, once again, kind of the outcome of a phishing attack. And, I think this needs to be stressed too in security awareness, trainings, that if, essentially these are the consequences of, clicking on a link or an attachment. All right. I think this was an interesting stat. So perception on security versus responsibility. Only 41% of users said that they know that they bear responsibility for cybersecurity at their workplace. That's kind of shocking to me, to be honest with you. 7% claim that they aren't even responsible at all, while the majority, 52%, weren't even sure. I don't know how half of the company has no idea that they're responsible for cybersecurity, but that is, those numbers are mind-boggling. And then if you contrast that with the view amongst security professionals, individuals that work in the security department, within cybersecurity, 85% of them whom say that most employees know that they are responsible for security. So there seems to be this gap, between perception and reality. And it suggests that there's a need for clearer communication about a shared responsibility rather than just, more training or security best practices and policies, right? I think there needs to be a little bit more behind that. So I thought that was an interesting stat that kind of came out. And, it's just important to note, right? Me as a cybersecurity professional, maybe I think, yeah, everyone should be aware of that. But at the end of the day, that's not the reality of it. So that's important to keep in mind as well. All right, next poll question. Who do you think is the most vulnerable target in a phishing attack? That's a pretty good question, individuals, employees, executives, or whaling, right? IT/security teams, or customers/clients. Well, I can tell you what my answer is, but I would love to hear from you guys, and then I am going to circle back on that one as well. All right, so I've talked through all this phishing stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the benefits of leveraging MDR. And yes, I created this PowerPoint, and that is an awesome image, isn't it? How I got the video going. It took me like 25 minutes to figure out, but it looks pretty cool, doesn't it? All right, let's talk a little bit about benefits of leveraging MDR for phishing analysis. So benefit number one on the analysis side, you get that investigation of a suspicious link or attachment by expert analysts. I can't stress that enough. When I say expert analysts, I mean individuals, within this industry who have multiple years of experience, triaging these types of investigations, triaging these types of emails to ensure, right, that it is an infection, or that it isn't a false positive, that it isn't something, kind of going on there that needs to be further investigated. I think, the skills gap in cybersecurity is quite large. You could say it's a chasm, right? A large gap between, what we think we've hired versus kind of those hands-on capabilities and skills. A lot of times when I've hired individuals that have, the alphabet after their name, they have all these certifications, but maybe don't have real world experience. That's what I look for a lot of times, is that real world experience, or an individual that has that drive to learn, right? So it's important to understand too, from a SOC team perspective, who is monitoring your SIM, and who's doing those investigations, and what level of experience do they have? Because If you have someone who's maybe got a year of experience, they can very easily miss something. So that's why it's always good to have 4 eyes on it, right? A double set of eyes to make sure and ensure, right, that those lower level individuals on the team aren't missing something, right? We're all learning here. I totally get that, but it is important to have expert analysts kind of triaging through those types of events. Notification process. So when you leverage MDR for phishing analysis, you get a notification. A lot of times, especially for Critical Start, we have 60-minute SLA. So a 60-minute on every single alert imaginable that can come into your SIM. It's 60 minutes. Anything that's considered critical, right, like a higher fidelity threat notification, that's 10 minutes. So the second it comes in, if it is a high fidelity type alert, right, mapped to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and it looks incredibly bad, right, we have 10 minutes to triage and respond, or at least reach out to you within that 10-minute period to let you know that we are working a case or an investigation. That's pretty good. I've worked on internal SOC teams before, and it is stretched thin sometimes, right? You might not have, individual, like, a million individuals on the team. You don't have 70 SOC team members that are investigating, different alerts. A lot of times, maybe it's 1 or 2 individuals, especially if you have a small team. So it can be incredibly difficult to hit those types of, mean time to detection, mean time to response, type metrics if you have a smaller team. And then on the response side of the house, from an MDR perspective, response actions can be taken on your behalf, right, to mitigate the threat. So that includes email removal from all affected inboxes. That includes notifications, to the individual who's responsible in the IT department that maybe there was a creation of a mail rule within Office 365 to auto forward to an adversary inbox. We see that a lot of times during phishing investigations where, if they've compromised someone's inbox, to establish further persistence, they'll change maybe username and password, but they'll also forward all inbound emails to their own controlled email as well. So it's good to make sure that you're covering and responding to all artifacts that are left behind in a particular event versus, just removing the email, because maybe there's more to it, right? If there was a credential phish, someone clicked on the link or attachment, you need to ensure, right, those actions that were taken ultimately are cleaning up the particular infection that had transpired. So let me give you a couple examples that I've seen recently, even within Critical Start's customer stack. So this is the customer stack that we have for one of our accounts. They have CrowdStrike as their EDR. They leverage our core platform, which is our cyber operations risk and response platform. And this is what was observed, right? A phishing email had arrived to a user's inbox. The end user clicked on the link, which redirected them to a fake website. The website then downloaded a dropper file that executed an encoded PowerShell command. It then attempted to create a fake registry entry for persistence. So maybe like the run key. Anytime you reboot your machine, that means it would continuously kick off that particular infection. And what did our MDR team do? They responded to that decoded PowerShell command within 13 minutes. That's actually pretty impressive, 13 minutes. So that's a pretty good time in terms of response. And then a full environment sweep and additional blocks were put in place within 36 minutes of that time frame. So kudos to our SOC team. That's incredibly impressive. But that's what happens when you have an MDR provider that has a massive organization of SOC analysts that have the ability, right, to respond quickly, investigate, triage, double integrity, ensuring you have 2 eyes, on particular cases and incidents to resolve a particular alert or an event. We like to work together here, and we think that's fantastic. So 36 minutes from completion, I think that's an amazing response time. All right, clean environment. Nothing bad happened in that bad boy. All right, let's go on to attack number 2. So this was the customer stack was Microsoft 365. They were also leveraging our cyber operations risk and response platform. Let's see what happened. Similar type scenario, phishing email arrived to the user's inbox. End user clicked on the link, which redirected them to a credential harvesting site. So this is a little bit different. This is a phishing email where they're harvesting, credentials. End user entered their credentials into the fake site, and account was compromised. Ugh, not good. SOC team was alerted based on Critical Start's threat intelligence capabilities. So our threat intel team, which is a fantastic team, right? All that was enriched within the alert. So we immediately identified that. The MDR team initiated a full password reset to the end user's 365 inbox to prevent a full business email compromise within 12 minutes. like 12, I don't, that's actually incredibly fast. 12 minutes. The second they saw that, the SOC team actually, notified the account through mobile SOC. We have actually an app as well. So if you're a client or a customer, you can basically receive these notifications on your mobile device. You can open them up and see immediately that action was taken, and you can go about your day and not worry about anything else because we've contained it. And this is where I like to have my stormtrooper pet that little guy on the ground. That's pretty cool. So clean environment. That is a quick response. I love our SOC team. That was amazing. So what does that look like on the back end? I think it's also important to look at, from a threat notification perspective, this is what it looks like. This is what an inbound, notification looks like. In this particular case, we're highlighting an atypical travel event, meaning let's say an individual typically logs in, while they reside in Kentucky, and then the next day they, logged in, maybe they're in Istanbul, right, or Lebanon or somewhere, right? That's maybe an atypical travel for that particular individual. We look for those outliers, right? We look for those, risky type items in authentication, which would trigger a response for us to investigate. So in this particular case, this individual logged in from Amsterdam. Very sus. That's why I put the sus thing. And this is what ultimately allowed us to investigate. We saw the page where those credentials were, entered. This looks like a fake, SharePoint site or a Microsoft, site. Enter your credentials, and we immediately notified the customer. Now, I had to clearly obfuscate all of that information. There's a lot of obfuscation here because I don't want to give up IP addresses or who this customer is, but this is what it looks like. We provide, and this is, human driven. This is not just orchestration automation. We just insert information. We validate, right, with human eyes as well. Now, of course, we leverage some AI in the back end, but we validate everything, right, that comes into, that particular console, because we do feel that a human-led SOC organization is much more effective, right, to have, a higher fidelity in terms of the notifications that we send to our customers. So this is what the, notification looks like. We provide and enrich, that information with threat intelligence as well, right? Last seen information, what it typically looks like, did the user click or not click that, particular link, and what was taken on behalf, of the customer. Also, what is at risk? From a response perspective, this is, as well what we provide within those notifications. And then what is the recommendation, right? If we recommended something or if we attempted to do something, maybe we didn't have the full capabilities from an API perspective in their environment to take particular action. That is noted as well within, the particular case. But we show them everything that transpires, right, throughout that case investigation. And, these are the primary responses as well. You can see, so we can create blocks for that particular indicator. We can confirm if the user is risky or dismiss it. We can disable a user, enable a user, reset a user's password. We can essentially take action on your behalf. Now, of course, this all comes, basically the terms of the engagement with each of our accounts. Everyone's a little bit different on what they feel comfortable with and letting their MDR provider deliver that type of service. But we feel, right, during after hours, 24/7, if you want something to happen at 2 a.m, providing us pre-authorization to take that action is incredibly important. So I just want to talk about and kind of wrap this thing up from an expected outcomes perspective. What are you looking for? And it starts with complete signal coverage. And what does that mean? To me, signal coverage is ensuring that you have all the appropriate data sources that are flowing into your SIM, and that we have all those, detection mechanisms being applied to that data. Right, we're triaging every single event that comes in based on the detections that we have for all those different data sources. So you want to make sure you have complete signal coverage. It also means that you don't have any endpoint protection coverage gaps, right? That you don't have missing antivirus or an endpoint protection like CrowdStrike or SentinelOne or Microsoft. If that's not installed on a device and it's missing, we believe as an MDR provider that should be on us as well to notify the customer that we've identified this in their environment. We have ways of doing that, and we provide that as a part of our MDR service. We call that our asset visibility capability. So you want to have that complete signal coverage, right? It ensures that all threats are being detected and responded to, and also preventing any of those preventing any protection gaps that could disrupt ultimately the operations for your organization. We want to lower the dwell time to essentially nothing, right? We don't want an adversary to be on a machine or on a box or in your environment or network. The lower the dwell time, obviously, the more success, right? You get fewer escalations to reduce alert fatigue. You're ensuring, your security defenses are staying effective, and you're ultimately preparing for a quick response. You're lowering your dwell time. What does that mean? Detection, MTTR, that's how they put it. Their mean time to respond, and actually remove an adversary if there is an adversary on your box or maybe a piece of malware. We want to lower that particular time that's on that. Human-driven response. You heard me say it before. We find this incredibly important. Unlike fully automated solutions, our MDR, combines expert human analysis, with real-time responses. We ensure that threats are assessed and they're mitigated based on the context and the potential impact. It's important to also have that enrichment of, is this a critical device? Is this a critical server? Does this have sensitive information on it? Or is this something that's less critical? We basically enrich all of our alert notifications with that information directly within our console so that we can provide you the best service. And then finally, you want to ensure that you have the expected controls in place. You want to have that continuous risk mitigation. Our approach not only identifies active threats, but it also addresses hidden risks that could, otherwise go unnoticed. So by continuously monitoring your environment, we're ultimately helping your organization stay protected against both emerging threats and, persistent security challenges. And we feel like this maximizes the value and efficiency of your current tools that you have deployed within your environment. Remember, we're an MDR provider that's vendor agnostic. We don't care, essentially who you have, but with the technologies that we do work with, we want to deliver obviously the best service that we can, given the data sources that you guys have. And then finally, gaining unified, comprehensive visibility for a more secure infrastructure. It's always about visibility, from my perspective. When you're protecting and monitoring an environment, if you are missing visibility in a particular segment of an environment or a network, that's a gap. That's a gap to your environment, and that's a potential entrance vector for an attacker. So incredibly important to make sure that you have that complete visibility. As we onboard our customers, we go through that process. We do an ingestion analysis. We look at all the data sources that you would like to have come in, and then we recommend additional data sources if you have them. So that's essentially Critical Start's approach, right, to phishing detection and response. So any questions? I'd like you to think through that. I'm going to pivot over to a upcoming events and resources slide while you think through that. I'm going to have Crystal come on and speak to that. But I would love to answer any of your questions. If you have any questions about phishing and cybersecurity in general, maybe about myself, I love talking about myself, feel free to ask a question and I will check the chat line. Crystal, over to you. Are you on the call?
Yes, thank you, Tim.
If not, I can always do it. December 12th, we also have a webinar on securing the future of cyber in the AI world. That sounds exciting. Please sign up for that one. So that's, AI, right? We know that's a risk, but it's also a positive thing too. Like how do you leverage AI to do faster detections? But how is AI also being used for bad? So I think that's going to be an interesting one. You can also download our ebook or buyer's guide on managed detection response if you'd like. You can also check out our market guide for managed detection response, and we also have on-demand webinars available on our website. I've done a few of them. You can check those out, and they're a good time. So I want to pivot into the Q&A session. Once again, I know, look, that's a pretty cool slide. If you have any questions, you want to say, Tim, your PowerPoint skills are on fleek, please let me know. I'm going to go through that right now. All right, let me just pop this window open. All right. How would you like to, hold on a sec, that is not me. How should we navigate AI-based risk? Great question, Chris. I think the next webinar is going to tackle that particular topic, but I can answer that question. I mean, AI-based risks are going to look actually very similar to the risks that we see today. I mean, they're going to blend a little bit better, right, within kind of that baseline of what looks normal versus what doesn't look normal. I showed, kind of an example of an AI-based phishing email attack and what that looks like. I mean, it looks flawless. It's flawlessly written, but I think it comes down to kind of once that awareness and training. I think it starts at the awareness and training level, especially with the employees, to be aware that, AI-based attacks are on the rise, that any sort of email that comes inbound that has that link or an attachment, question it, right? You should always question any email, even if it looks like it's coming from inside or internally. Was I expecting this email? Should there be a link or an attachment? If I click this, what is the outcome of that? So I think it's really important to always ask those questions. AI-based risks too. If you think about it, when a piece of malware executes maybe within an environment, they might leverage AI to polymorphic itself, right, and become different components of malware. I still think our endpoint protection platforms are going to be good at detecting those types of capabilities. I think where AI attacks are going to be the problem is that kind of that phishing component, though. So once again, that kind of starts with education and awareness. All right, let's see, what else do we have here?
Tim, we actually have a lot of questions screen.
I think I'm in the wrong section. Let me see if where's the Q&A. Right, here's the Q&A section. Sorry about that. Here we go. I found it. Sorry, I'm still learning this platform. All right. Can your program support a cybersecurity champion program where you can easily identify users who are doing the right things to make things more positive and less negative? So kind of like a gamification, type capability. So yeah, our platform doesn't necessarily create that sort of end user experience. I know what you're talking about, though. When I was working at a DLP company, we did kind of like the gamification of DLP. So if an individual didn't click on something or did something correctly, right, with a sensitive document, right, they labeled it properly, right, they would get points, right, and we gamified that. And I think that's an interesting kind of avenue to take with the security technology, right, for users that are doing the right things. But right, it's difficult to quantify, I think, a lot of times, especially when you're talking about phishing. Let's say 300 individuals got that email, maybe 2 people clicked on it. Can you validate and say that 298 people saw that and said they did the right thing? They might not have even read it. So I think it can be tough to kind of, once again, quantify what those numbers look like. But I think that's a great question now, right? Kind of a great approach to kind of gamifying cybersecurity. All right, let's go on to another question here. Is AI and automated, i.e. brute force phishing, a major part of the next evolution of phishing? And can this challenge be fully met by the tools and education we have available today? So, an automated brute force phishing a major part of the next evolution of phishing? Yes, it definitely is the next part of evolution. I would not be surprised if a majority of the phishing emails that come out today and going forward into the future haven't been crafted by some AI component, right? Because adversaries, they want to be sneaky, right? They want to be able to sneak through the cracks, and they want to be able to sound like it's a professional email. So, what way to do that, especially if English is not their first language, or, whatever country they're targeting, they're going to insert that into ChatGPT and make it sound amazing. So I do think it is, it's happening today, right? It's something that we need to address today. And as I mentioned earlier, too, from an education perspective, I think we do need to have a stronger emphasis and focus on, what these AI-based attacks look like, and then questions that they should be asking themselves when they do receive those types of emails. All right. How managed is managed? What's the right mix depending on the organization and risk profile? That's a good question. So when you're talking about, let's just say managed detection response, let's just keep it at that level. I think one size doesn't necessarily always fit all, right? We have organizations or enterprises that have a SOC team, and maybe they want to leverage us as an extension of their SOC team, where they want us to do just level 1 triage and analysis, and maybe they do 2 and 3, maybe they do forensics, maybe they just want us to escalate alerts for them to investigate. I think it does depend. You kind of were hitting on that. It depends on the organization itself, and not only what the risk profile is, but also the maturity of that organization. Do they have incident responders? Do they have threat hunters? Do they have individuals, right, that are fully capable of responding to a threat if we were to send them kind of a level 1 type of an alert? So I think there is that component. I think also on the managed side, it's good to know upfront what your MDR provider is providing in terms of a response. Some MDR providers offer guided responses where they tell you, hey, this is wrong, you got to go fix it. That's not a great model, in my opinion. The model that you want to look for are deep API integrations, right, within your technology stacks that really enable the SOC team, within your MDR provider to take action on your behalf. Because if you allow something to continuously run or execute, or maybe an adversary to move laterally within your environment, you're only going to cause further damage. So it is important to respond swiftly and quickly. So I do like that question. Okay, I feel like I answered like all of these questions. 1 second.
We have a question from Paul. What does human-driven
Maybe it's early to
response?
ask this question, but I'd like advice for maximizing protection in a Microsoft enterprise environment full of E5 licenses. Well, hey, that's perfect because Critical Start is like a superstar partner with Microsoft. We are essentially part of their design board on the XDR side. We're heavily, actually, we're more integrated probably with Microsoft than any of our other endpoint protection platforms. So for maximizing E5 capabilities to managing Sentinel, SIM type capabilities, we 100% are the company to at least evaluate for that. So to the individual that reached, I think, for this individual that asked this question, if you want to learn more about what we can do to maximize your E5 capabilities, Critical Start does a fantastic job of doing that. I mean, I've seen it firsthand. So I would definitely reach out. Feel free to reach out to myself as well if you want to go directly through me. But I think that's another great question. Okay. I don't see any additional questions. I do appreciate everyone's time today. I know I'm gonna give you maybe 11 minutes back left in the day, but once again, if you
Sorry, we
have
actually have
anything
a lot
further,
of
if you have any
questions
additional questions,
remaining.
you want to reach out, here's my email, tim.banos@criticalstart.com. Also, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm a pretty fun guy. You can reach out to me. You can message me if you have any additional questions. I'm happy to help and answer any of those questions. But until next time, I thank you, and please sign up for the next webinar. It's going to be an awesome one about AI-based attacks. All right. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.